Hey everyone, it's Selwen here, now the Havoc Demon Hunter. So, for the first time in Shadowlands Beta, we do now have a full-ish scope of how Havoc is going to play out in Shadowlands. We do have Conduits, we have Legendaries, we have all of the borrowed powers to some extent, pretty much all of them. Obviously, they are all subject to changes and some tuning changes and whatnot, but we do have now a potential window to see how it's going to play out. Now, at its core, fundamentally, Havoc still feels like an incomplete spec to me, right? It still feels like the borrowed powers are still essentially completing the spec at this point. Without them, the spec feels very shallow. Now, those borrowed powers, as I said, are adding some interesting synergies, are adding some interesting things to some extent. We do have one big standouts in our legendary Conduits, talents, synergies, and a couple of other minor ones. But again, it's kind of like BFA, right, where the spec felt incomplete, but over time with Azerite traits, with essences, with corruption and so on, the spec became whole in a way. But, you know, is it whole really when the fundamental core is kind of broken, kind of missing? But anyway, without going on a tangent, let's talk about basically everything. I did had a past video on Havoc on Alpha, but I wasn't happy with it. So let's just recap the baseline changes on our talents and our base toolkit, and then go over to Conduits and Legendaries and see what potential synergies, what interesting things are there going for Havoc, and in general how it's playing out. Feel free to skip ahead if you want to. There's the timeline now has all the fancy timestamps. So, baseline changes. A lot of your abilities now have target caps like many other specs and classes in Shadowlands, which is... it doesn't feel all that good, and personally, in my opinion. In most situations, it's fine. It just doesn't feel all that good when you have a lot of targets and your abilities are not hitting all of them. But anyway, Blade Dance is one of those abilities. It only hits 5 targets now, and the dodge component, the 100% dodge component of that ability has been removed. That obviously harms some of the skill cap-ish, right, with the spec that really came with your experience with the game and the content that you did. There was some pretty interesting things that you could potentially do with that dodge chance in dungeons to completely negate some abilities and so on. So that was kind of cool to do, and it's sad that you know, that's gone. Obviously, the death sweep of Blade Dance, so the meta version of Blade Dance, still has that dodge component. So there's that, but yeah, it kind of sucks, especially for PvP too. Not very good. Now, Immolation Aura has been made baseline, okay? So the baseline version of Immolation Aura is essentially the same, but it's only providing you 20 Fury outright, okay? So it gives you 20 Fury the minute that you click it, and you still have the talent that you can talent into to provide you more Fury over time, okay? So it's providing you 60, which adds up to the 80, and it's providing you 80 Fury over 12 seconds. So essentially the same, but you are getting it baseline to kind of open up this tier a little bit, but we'll talk about that after. Other changes, there's some slight nerfs to your blur. The damage reduction is now 20% instead of 35%, and we also have a change to I-beam. Now, this change on the tooltip is kind of weird because it's essentially saying that you're going to deal reduced damage to secondary targets. Now, it's not entirely clear as to what that means exactly. Now, what I've been able to tell is that essentially what it's happening with I-beam is to basically not have a target cap on this ability, right? To avoid putting a target cap on this ability, which would feel horrible, right? It would feel horrible. They decided to essentially, on your main target, I-beam does the full damage, and then on secondary targets, it deals reduced damage, but that is modified a bit by the amount of targets that you have. And I might put some footage in the background where, you know, in a normal trash pack where there's like 4 enemies or 3 enemies, you know, I-beam is hitting for a certain amount, but when you have, say, 10 enemies, a lot of weak, you know, small mobs, I-beam is like hitting for like 70 or something on all of them. So it kind of has a big diminishing returns there with the I-beam damage, which, you know, is both good and bad because I much rather have this working in this way than having a target cap on I-beam. But yeah, there's that. So that essentially covers our baseline changes. So let's talk about talents. Essentially, talents that have changed is just a few of them. And as we go through the talents, I'm going to mention a couple of legendaries and a couple of conduits, which does provide those interesting synergies. If you don't know what conduits are, I'm just going to place a very generic explanation of them because I don't want to have to repeat what conduits are every single time in one of these videos, right? So I might place some generic explanation at some point in a video so you can have some context. But essentially, they are like Azurite traits. It's basically, they're kind of like these little buffs to your class and spec. So, talents, first year, everything has stayed the same. Demonic Appetite went back and forth, but it's essentially the same now. Burning Hatred, we talked about, and Insatiable Hunger, I can never really say that correctly. It has a slight buff to make your Demon's Bite have 20% more damage. It's a little buff to this ability, but still doesn't feel like it's enough to really take away from Burning Hatred, or even if you're going for Demon Blades build for some reason. This year here also we changed, I do have to mention that Fell Barrage has a change because now it also has a target cap of 5 enemies, just like your Blade Dance, which, again, doesn't really feel nice. Fell Barrage always felt so cool to use when you had a lot of enemies, and only having it hit 5 kind of feels like crap, let's be honest. But yeah, that's the new Fell Barrage. Then we have Unbound Chaos. Now, I hate this, and I also really like this. Why? Well, essentially, when you activate Immolation Aura, I believe this was an Azurite trait. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't played much Demon Hunter in BFI. But essentially, when you activate Immolation Aura, you're going to gain this little buff. Now, this little buff, it's not on a timer, so it stays with you, so you have a lot of time to decide when you should use your Fell Rush to deal this big, very big AoE damage. Like, again, numbers might be tuned, but the damage that is currently dealing, it is a lot, right? It is a lot. To basically slam the targets, slam the ground, and hit all enemies for equal damage. It's not like spread with like your I-beam. So essentially it's going to look like this. And I see it hits really quite hard. And now the issue with this is that, well, first of all, the good with this is that it adds some meaning when you click your Immolation Aura and adds some meaning to your Fell Rush. I liked planning around this. I liked that when I clicked my Immolation Aura, I knew that my Fell Rush is going to be more powerful, right? And I could plan around that, to hit as much targets as I could, and so on. It added more meaningfulness to those abilities, and that's fun. That created some engaging gameplay. The issue with this is that it's kind of hard to target. Now, I'm playing from the EU, which adds a lot of latency, but in general, the way it works is kind of like the slam hits where you start your Fell Rush. Okay, well, I didn't have it there. It kind of hits where you start your Fell Rush, not where your Fell Rush ends. But there's been times where it slams in the middle of my Fell Rush. So I Fell Rush from there to there, and the one that I did slammed there, but there's been times where it slams there in the middle. So it's very hard to time, and there's been time in dungeons where I tried to use that, and the slam missed the targets completely. Now, I'm not sure if they can easily fix that, because I wish they could, because it is interesting. I do like it. So you can be subjective, but I do like having that in, because it's fun. It's kind of fun to just, be able to do one big Fell Rush, essentially, and provide that big burst damage. You do that, then you combine with your I-Beam, then you go into meta, and then you do your Death Sweep, and then you have your Covenant abilities, and provide some very big burst damage, say in dungeons and whatnot. And so I do like that, so I really hope they can make that work in terms of, being fairly easier to target. Maybe just have it always go where you actually start your Fell Rush. Maybe that's a possibility. Again, I'm not sure on the technicalities. That also means that you did lost Fell Mastery, but like Fell Mastery, this is creating a cool synergy with momentum, right? Because momentum is making your Fell Rush increase your overall damage by 15%, which means that Unbound Chaos, right? That Unbound Chaos damage is going to deal 15% more damage. Not only that, this is kind of where some cool synergies are gonna lie, which are gonna lie between this and Bound Chaos, right? This talent, Momentum, Master of the Glaive, and your Immolation Aura and Burning Hatred. Why? Because we do have a couple of Legendaries and a couple of Conduits, which are adding some interesting effects to all of those abilities. So for one, we do have this Legendary, which is making your Immolation Aura have a chance to give you a stack of Fell Bombardment. Let me just remove this. Where are my boots? So it gives you a stack of Fell Bombardment, which is increasing the damage of your next throw glaive by 20%, and launching an additional glaive at a nearby target, stacking up to 5 times. Okay? Stacking up to 5 times. Now, the component of the throw glaive, like the launching an additional glaive, is completely broken right now because I used this in a dungeon and I pulled a completely faraway pack and well, we wiped. So yeah, it's kind of messed up right now. But you have this, okay? So this is adding extra meaning to your Immolation Aura, okay? So you have Burning Hatred, you have this Legendary, you have Unbound Chaos, all surrounding your Immolation Aura, right? And Unbound Chaos combines a synergy with Momentum, which is providing the 15% damage increase. Now, on top of this, you also have a Conduit, which is providing... Where is it? No errors. Which is making your Throw Glaive, targets that you hit with your Throw Glaive, also take 8% more damage from your I-Beam, okay? So now you have a more interesting Immolation Aura. You have a more interesting Glaive, because that Legendary is making your Throw Glaive more powerful through your Immolation Aura. And you have a Conduit, which is improving the damage of your I-Beam. So you do have these interesting synergies here, and then you have Momentum as well, due to having to use Fell Rush with all of these, synergies, with all of these talent choices. Okay, so you do have this interesting synergy here where you start using abilities that you normally wouldn't really use, like Throw Glaive hasn't really been that useful since Bloodlet in Legion, right? So now you have this these synergies and these abilities that you often thought about them in a very simple way, but now they are providing these interesting effects, and I do enjoy that. I think that's rather fun. You do lose Demonic, but we will get there. Okay, you also get another Conduit, which I missed to mention, which is also increasing your Immolation Aura damage by 10%. Now, one thing that you have to take in mind with Conduits as well is that they're gonna have item levels, so the values that you're gonna see here are likely to be higher the better the Conduit you get. So the 8% from this and the 10% from this might be higher with higher quality Conduits. Okay, now more on Conduits in a bit. I was just mentioning that because these talents are providing some interesting synergies with the overall spec and these borrowed powers, if you will. Okay, now we'll get back to that in a minute, so let's just talk about other changes here in the talent. Now, we have Soul Rending, which has been through nerfs as well, numbers nerfs. The same thing goes for Desperate Instincts, some number nerfs. And then on this tier, we have a couple of changes too. Okay, so we have Cycle of Hatred. Okay, we have Cycle of Hatred, which is making your Chaos Strike... when your Chaos Strike refines Fury, it also reduces the cooldown of I-Beam. Now, generally, this is, synergizing well with Demonic, is synergizing well with that overall playstyle. The only issue with this is that it's gonna have to fight with First Blood, and we all kind of know what happens to the talents that have to fight First Blood. They never really win, right? They never really win. Now, this kind of sucks because this is obviously very good for dungeons, this is obviously very good for Demonic, or just, in general content, where your I-Beam is quite valuable, right? But especially with Demonic. But yeah, having to fight First Blood really kind of sucks. And then we have Essence Break. Now, Essence Break, it is more interesting than, I forgot the name, Dark Slash, I believe? where it's essentially providing you a Colossus Smash-like window to improve the damage of your K-Strike and Blade Dance by 40% for 8 seconds. Now, it also cleaves now. It hits all nearby targets and also has a pretty cool animation. Pretty cool effect. Now, in theory, like personally, I never really like this type of talents in Havoc, because I don't think they really fit the overall theme with the spec in creating these higher damaging windows. But mechanically, it does provide some interesting gameplay where, you're gonna have to time where to use that Essence Break to make the most out of your K-Strikes and Blade Dances and so on. The only part that sucks again is that he's gonna have to fight with First Blood. So it's better. It's definitely better, but if First Blood wasn't here, and maybe it was Macelin, it could prove to be a lot more interesting in being able to choose Essence Break for certain situations, and maybe Cycle of Hatred for certain situations, and then have something else entirely here. That could be interesting, but the way it stands, First Blood just feels so good, right? It just feels so good. Then you have Master of the Glaive, damn it, that's obviously synergizing really well with the Legendary, and is synergizing really well with the Conduits to improve your I-beam damage, okay? Then we have Demonic. Now, Demonic has suffered a nerf, so it no longer lasts for 8 seconds, it's only for 6. So, it obviously sucks because it's obviously gonna minimize your possible window to do your Blade Dances inside that Demonic window. So it just sucks. It's an obvious nerf to the Demonic type of playstyle, and in general, all of these changes and the lack of not being able to, the spec overall being slower due to losing a lot of Azerite traits and so on, it does harm the Demonic spec quite a lot, which kind of sucks because I think a lot of Havoc players, including myself, really have fun playing Demonic, even though it's a very simple sort of playstyle. It is one of the best playstyles that Havoc has to offer. Now, back to the Legendaries and Conduits. Now, I did mention those cool synergies that we have going here with, Handbound Chaos, Burning Hatred, Master of the Glaive, Momentum, and the Legendary and the Conduits. That is providing a somewhat interesting playstyle. I was actually thinking about my next moves. I was actually thinking about abilities, in Havoc. I was not just spamming buttons. I was actually thinking about things in my Havoc in order to perform decently well. So I did enjoy that that playstyle. Now, one thing I do want to mention here on the Conduits is that first of all, this Conduit here, which is increasing the damage for I-beam on the targets that you use through Glaive, this is a debuff. Now, on this character, for some reason, is bugged. Like I click it, it's actually not adding, but I have another Demon Hunter of which this is working. And this is the simple debuff, so you cannot spread this on, say, 10 targets. This is only going to spread it to 3 targets, which is the maximum that your Throw Glaive is going to hit. But you obviously have this Legendary, which is throwing an additional Glaive, which will spread that Conduit further. Now, the 8% might not seem that much. It is a lot in the long run, but may not seem that much when you want like some burst damage, right? But again, take in mind that Conduits might have higher levels, and that will that will make it the number overall higher and overall more powerful. The same thing goes for the Growing Inferno one, which I mentioned. Now, we also have a couple of other Conduits, like we have this one, which is providing your Blade Dance a chance to apply Essence Break. Now, this could potentially be interesting. I have this placed here, and so I've been playing with it. And in some ways, it's nice, but it's more bad than nice, right? Because it's nice because in moments where you get this, like say in when you are doing a dungeon, you're killing trash packs and you perform a Blade Dance, you might have a target there which will get Essence Break. So that target will take extra damage from Blade Dances and Chaos Strikes. So when that happened, I was like, oh cool, that target has Essence Break, so I'm going to focus my Chaos Strikes on that target now so I can deal some extra damage. In that way, it was kind of cool, was kind of engaging, but 5%, the chance is very low. And the type of ability that Essence Break is, which is an ability that you kind of want to, plan around, right? You kind of want to plan around to make the most out of that, right? You kind of want to plan around to make the most out of that. And having a 5% chance that is completely random does make a lot of sense to me, essentially. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me because it makes it very hard to capitalize on that damage. Now, you do have, if you really hate yourself and you love RNG, you do have a legendary. Where is it? This one, which is kind of doing a similar thing. Obviously, this is synergizing pretty well with First Blood and Trail of Ruin, but this one is providing a similar thing, which is providing your Blade Dance a 10% chance to grant you Chaotic Blades, which is increasing the damage of your Chaos Strike by 25% and the chance to refund Fury by an additional 60%, which essentially is going to be 100%, right? It's always going to refund you Fury. Now, if you hate yourself again, you can combine these two, like this Conduit and this Essence, and have this really RNG heavy sort of setup where a lot of your damage is gonna come from these windows, which are completely random. Now, I can see this potentially working with Demon Blades, right? This could potentially work with Demon Blades and First Blood and so on. But yes, it's extremely RNG heavy, and that will make it very hard or almost impossible to really, maximize that. But hey, could potentially work. Now, that basically covers Conduits. As for Legendaries, more than those, we do have a couple of potential interesting ones, especially when it comes down to numbers. So we have this one when you cast I-Beam. When you cast I-Beam, where's my chest? I'm blind. Okay. When you cast I-Beam, you're gonna get a Demon Hunter Summoner, essentially, that is also gonna cast a Fell Devastation. So it's kind of cool. Yeah, you do it, you get the second one. So it's just extra damage. It's obviously very good for, dungeons, mythic bloods, and so on and so forth, which is rather nice. It's rather nice. Now, I do have a similar one, which is improving your I-Beam, which I-Beam has a 22% chance to not incur its cooldown. Now, this is nice, but again, it's kind of like the RNG of this one, right? It's almost impossible to really predict this, and you might have this when you don't really want it. So it really makes it really hard to play around with that, but it's neat. We do have this one, which is kind of odd. It comes from the Targhast, which is making your Metamorphosis increase size, movement speed, and melee range by 100%. So, okay, it's kind of cool because it gets really huge, but yeah, it's not doing much. Outside of that, and yeah, that essentially covers your legendaries. We do have this one, which is reducing Fell Rush cooldown by 30%. Again, I don't really feel like this is necessary. Fell Rush, the cooldown is very low, and you might think, well, that will combine well with Unbound Chaos, but not really. I mean, you are bound by Immolation Aura, not Fell Rush cooldown, right? So it doesn't feel all that necessary, but again, it does provide somewhat of a synergy with momentum. Now, there's one thing left to talk about, which is Covenant abilities. Now, there are some synergies here in Covenant abilities, not a whole lot. So you actually have a lot more synergies there with your Conduits and Legendaries. But you do have some. So we have the Kyrian Covenant ability, which is the Elysium Decree, which is a sigil that when you detonate, you place and it's going to detonate. It's going to deal extra AoE damage, so it's excellent to combine with your I-Beams, with your Unbound Chaoses if you're using, and Blade Dance and so on, other your AoE abilities. And it's also going to provide you Soul Fragments. This is great to obviously use with Demonic Appetite, so you use this when you go into I-Beam, and if you're playing with Demonic, when you go into Demonic, you're going to have a lot of fragments and in turn a lot of fury to spend. So it does provide an interesting synergy. It feels very good at using dungeons. It has a conduit. Okay, each Covenant ability has a specific conduit that may improve it. And the Elysium Decree conduit, it's actually providing a replication of the ability, essentially, right? It's when you use it, you're going to get a second one that is going to deal 50% extra damage. So again, extra damage is always nice. Then we have the Sinful Brand, which is a Venthyr Covenant ability. Essentially going to brand the target. It's going to reduce their melee and the casting speeds by 30%, so a lot like the Curse of Tongues from Warlocks. And it's going to apply this dot that is going to deal a lot of damage. Now, it doesn't really have a synergy with anything. It's just dealing damage. But you do have a very cool component that when you activate Metamorphosis is going to spread Sinful Brand to all nearby enemies. That's kind of nice. So you're going to deal a shitload of damage when you actually spread this. You're not going to be able to do this a lot because obviously this is tied to the Metamorphosis cooldown. This does not work with the Mnemonic I-Beam. So it has a very niche use, but when you use it, yes, it feels very, very good. So in a big Mythic Plus pull, this could potentially prove to be very powerful. Just an example. Or you can time this with ads. Then we have the other ones. So we have the Necrolords, the Father to the Flame. Now this one has suffered some changes. So essentially, you commission a duel to death against a condemned demon. So essentially, you're gonna summon this demon that you can be able to defeat. It's very weak, okay? It's very weak. And when you defeat it, you're gonna get this pool. Now this pool before was actually really small, now it's actually rather big, and while you stay inside of that pool, you're gonna gain 20% increased attack speed, and damage, and enemies are gonna deal 10% less damage to you. Now, the attack speed feels pretty underwhelming. It potentially could prove interesting if you're playing with Demon Blades, but does feel pretty underwhelming. Now, there is one component of this that can be overlooked, is the fact that since you're killing a demon, the soul that you absorb, so not only you're going to get 30 Fury if you're playing with Demonic Appetite, you're getting 20% damage buff due to you consuming a demon soul. So, you know, there's that. That's the most interesting aspect of this ability. Then we have the Night Fey Covenant ability, which is the Hunt. You mark this target, it has a big cooldown of 3 minutes. You mark this target and you're going to charge. It has a cast time, which does feel weird. And you're going to charge to a target. It's going to inflict nature damage and you're going to root it. And while it's marked for 1 minute, your Fury generation from that target is going to be increased by 50%. So your Demon's Bite is going to generate a lot more Fury, which is nice. And you may reactivate this ability every 30 seconds to teleport behind the target. So it's providing you even more mobility. And also ignores line of sight. Now this has some pretty big uses in PvP and some niche uses in PvE. Now this in comparison to the others, especially when you compare Sinful Brand or at least some Decree, it feels very underwhelming. Because yes, it's doing some pretty crazy things and you being able to charge and ignore line of sight. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of usefulness. Yes, it's providing you more Fury, but again, when you compare it with the others, it doesn't really seem like a big deal, right? You do fine without that. It's cool, and it has an issues, and that's kind of about it. Now, the conduits surrounding the hunt, we don't know really what it is, but the other abilities, which I actually forgot to mention, it's the Father to the Flame for an example, so the one with the demon. The conduit will increase the duration of that pool by 5 seconds, again, may increase as the conduit's going higher in item level. And the Sinful Brand is just a simple cooldown reduction. Again, this may all be changed in the future, but it's a simple cooldown reduction of 1 second, which is pretty underwhelming, but again, higher item level conduits might increase that. Okay guys, so essentially that's Havoc. Now, how is it playing overall? Now, Bare Bones is playing not so good. I think playing without the borrowed powers, so essentially how you're going to play your Havoc before you actually get your Legendary, before you actually get your Conduits, it feels like an incomplete spec. I think that's the best way I can describe it. It feels like a very slow version of what you currently have. And that doesn't feel very good. You know, it still feels fine. You know, like your damage is completely fine. Your I-beams are still very fun to use. Your damage is still fine. But you're not going to have a lot of interesting things till you get Legendaries, till you get Conduits, and that kind of sucks. Until then, yes, it's going to be this kind of slow version of what you're used to, which is not very good, but once you get Legendaries, you might have some interesting gameplay. Nothing mind-blowing, but some interesting gameplay, and you're going to have more interesting buttons to click. Again, if the numbers hold up and all of that, you're going to be clicking Throw Glaives, you're going to be managing a couple of more things, and that could, again, provide some interesting gameplay. Alright guys, so that pretty much covers Havoc Demon Hunter. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and do let me know what you think about Havoc Demon Hunter down below. All of your concerns, all of your hopeful wishes, and if you think that maybe this current version is pretty decent, and that you are happy that maybe a Throw Glaive will be a meaningful ability that you're actually gonna press. Okay guys, as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.